Good morning. So I am the speaker that stands between you and lunch. So thank you, Jeff. Actually, wherever Jeff invites me to speak, I go. I don't even need to know what the event's about, because generally, he is one of the most thoughtful human beings on the planet. Before I launch into talking a little bit about leading innovation, just a short story about Jeff. I was actually in the midst of writing a book around idea making, and I was talking to him about various things, and one of the questions struck a chord, because at the end of the book I asked two questions. What is enough? And what matters most at the end of the day? And so Jeff, I think, asked me, like, so what matters most to you? So quite naturally, I mean, I love my family, my kids, and I started talking about my family, and then he asked this question. Are you as creative and innovative with your kids and your family as you are your clients? I was like, shut up, Jeff. But for those of you who know Jeff, doesn't he have a grounding type of thinking, presence he creates and pulls us back to things that matter most? And that's why when friends like Jeff call, I'm always like, yeah, if I could make the schedule work, let's make it work. So first of all, thank you for having me here. You guys are my heroes. Anybody who works within 6 feet of a nonprofit are my heroes. The work that you do matters to our world. And just like Dr. Key said earlier, thank you. It's really important. It's an honor to be here. I want to spend just a few minutes with you talking about innovation. And this is a huge topic. It's a word that's thrown around often, and I believe everybody sitting in this room is an innovator. I distinguish innovation from creativity in the sense that creativity is often a subset of innovation, but it's not the same thing. Innovation requires problem solving. It requires a willingness to face a challenge and figure out solutions for that challenge. And if you're in not-for-profit work, you're directly in that space of innovation. Now, you need creativity sometimes, but really, a higher level of problem solving is in this realm of innovation. So what I thought might be helpful for leaders like yourself is 3 things. One is framing the work of innovation that you're doing. Secondly is maybe giving you a sense of a process that might be helpful. And third is, like, how do you lead innovation in an organization? And how do you integrate it into your organization as well as your life in general? Sound good? So let's jump in. Framing the work of innovation. When you do studies around innovation, generally, some people talk about 10 types of innovation, all the different subject matter around innovation, but it generally boils down to 3 areas of focus. The first question you want to ask is, what area of innovation are you working on? For some, it may be systemic innovation. This is the type of innovation that really challenges pre-existing business models. And in recent years, the last decade or so, you've seen a lot of companies, as well as nonprofits, disrupt the norm, reframing what business looks like. This type of systemic innovation requires probably the highest leaders, most senior leaders of an organization to participate, right? Another type of innovation may be like a core product innovation. For you, it may be a core certain type of product offering or a program offering. That type of innovation is taking what you're already doing and making it that much better. In the business world, examples might be is when Intuit first started out as personal banking software, started to hear from its customers saying, hey, can we use this for my small business? Can you add this feature or that feature? And it turned into QuickBooks. And then later on, they went into TurboTax. So it's taking what you already do really well and making it that much better. That type of innovation probably requires other people in the room. It doesn't always require the senior, highest leadership. It may include maybe some outsiders, people even in unrelated industries that may spark innovation within the organization. Another type of innovation may be a customer experience innovation. Years ago, I had the opportunity to spend some time with a gentleman who created, when Virgin America first came to was created, the brand architect behind that. And he talked about how he created every point of customer experience for the airline. Now, flying, like Jeff mentioned here, is not always a pleasant experience, but he did his part to try to create a brand where from check-in, booking, all the way through the experience on the plane with ambient music, flight attendants dressed in black, all of these types of various experiences, he tried to create a customer experience. For you, it might be a donor experience. It may be a board experience you're trying to create to rally the right type of leadership to help you lead your organization. But knowing what type of innovation you're going after, because systemic innovation probably requires a lot more sometimes. And understanding who you need around the table to have that conversation versus always having the same conversation with the same people around the table. Does that make sense? So maybe framing innovation might be helpful. The second thing is that innovation often comes out of actual doing. So if you look over here, I feel like Van and White. If you look over here, and forgive me, this is like the consultant side of me. I promise it'll get more and more tactical, practical as the presentation goes on. But all of you in here have some type of profit or a purpose formula. This is kind of like your strategy. This is your high vision. You announce it maybe through some writing communication to your teams. What usually happens is based on where you're going, you allocate resources. And those resources turn into strategic actions. So your team will start implementing some of those ideas. But what happens after that is the actual strategy with which you actually do your business. So even though it sounds one way here, most organizations are run with that strategy, whatever that is in the real world. And as you're actually carrying out the vision or the strategy that you put together or are practicing, one of two things usually happens, and this is where innovation comes to play. First is, it can produce improved understanding of what works and what doesn't work. You realize, you know what, that program was a great idea, but it doesn't work. We should improve it by doing X, Y, and Z. That's called deliberate strategy, where it helps inform future resource allocation so that you can continue to build the organization that way. Sometimes, though, as you're working in nonprofit or even the for-profit world, things emerge that you did not expect. Unanticipated opportunities which arise from problems and successes. And you realize, man, this is a great opportunity for us. This is where I think a lot of nonprofit leaders, because they are visionaries generally and are very noble and sometimes idealistic, anyone relate? Is you realize, man, I have 10 things I can do. And sometimes leaders try to force feed that into the DNA of the organization when that new idea doesn't really align with the purpose of the organization. When you're at that crossroad as a leader, you have to make an innovation decision. Do I try to force it back into the core of our organization, or should I spin it off and make it something else? Time and time again, case study after case study has shown that people who try to force something into the life of an organization usually damage it. And this is why when things spin off, sometimes it's better to create a whole new team and a whole new initiative and a whole new path to create something that makes that meaningful. This is why when you see companies like Meta or Facebook acquiring Instagram, they don't suddenly make it Facegram, thank God. But they kept the team at Instagram to do what they need to do and surrounded them with other team members. So in innovation, keep in mind that just because something's new doesn't mean you have to put it back into the life of your organization. Make sense? You have to make some strategic decisions, staffing decisions, to allow things to incubate on its own. And this is where it gets confusing, where you have one team doing 3 nonprofits. It gets a little bit confusing as to what is my role relative to the other one. We're facing this with a couple of nonprofits, larger nonprofits we work with in California, that have multiple business ventures going, but they have shared staffing, and it's becoming an issue right now. The second thing is developing a process. As you think about a process for innovation, there is no perfect process. Every process probably has some faults, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. There are going to be issues, they're going to be relational. A lot of times innovation, I think they say over 94% of innovation projects fail within companies. And a lot of that is just the nature of innovation, but some of that is really relational between team members. It has to do with maybe lateral moves. Someone is put in charge of a large project that will require, say, 3-4 years of work, but after a year or two, they laterally move to a different department, and the project just kind of stays stagnant. So innovation, there are many X factors in there. So when you see a process, it is a process, and you have to figure out which processes work for the type of organization that you're a part of. But one question definitely to ask is, what is the real job to be done? This is something I learned from one of the professors I had the privilege of learning under. His name is Clayton Christensen, and he's a professor at Harvard that coined the term disruptive innovation. And what he always talked about is you could provide a product or service to someone, but you have to ask yourself, what's the real job you're doing for your customer? It may not be what you're delivering. So I try to contextualize it into a nonprofit context. Some of you, probably all of you, have great programs, for example, that service the people that will benefit most at the end of the day of your work. But even beyond that, what does that program do for that individual? Maybe it gives them a sense of, for some, self-esteem. For other, courage. Others are inspired. And I think for us to think in terms of like even program design, and this is part of the process of like really understanding a human-centered design approach, or some people call it design thinking. Over the last several decades, this is the idea is that we have to learn how to put ourselves back in the shoes of those we serve. And it's really a deep, empathetic approach to design. And I know I'm sort of speaking to the choir, if you will, because nonprofit leaders generally have incredibly high empathy and compassion. As soon as you start like losing that because you become a professional nonprofit person, I think you got to recatch yourself and put yourself back in the environment of those you hope to help. And so thinking about what is the real job to be done. Here's one way that many folks do it. I've had the privilege of like sitting down and learning from some of the fathers of design thinking, and you know, it's really about this human-centered approach. The idea is like, say all of us were tasked to build the next, I don't know, Honda Odyssey. Anybody own Honda Odysseys? Are they still around? Yeah. Okay. One way to do it is to bring all the smartest people into a strategic boardroom and say, hey, let's figure this out. Let's whiteboard this out. We have the designer, the engineer, the marketer. We have the business model, the finance person, and you just kind of work at it. That would be kind of traditional strategic development. Design thinking would be more like, hey, why don't we just rent a whole bunch of Odysseys, and let's jump in the Odyssey and go on a road trip together. So if some of you are used to driving, sit in the back, right? If others are used to controlling the AC, feel what it feels like not to control the AC. If you're used to controlling the music, sorry, this trip you're not controlling the music. And you begin to feel what that ride feels like after an hour. You know, after 2 hours, it feels different. 3 hours, and you start to build empathy for the customer. That would be the idea. And sometimes when we're pushing big vision for our nonprofits, it's possible that we lose sight of the very people we try to serve. And so this is just you can look up design thinking, and something in this type of form will come out. But it's just the idea of really framing what is it you're really trying to solve for. That's the first thing. And then the second part is like seeing the unseen, or are there presuppositions or assumptions that we're making about an issue, about a topic? Is there something that we're doing in our approach that we assume everybody else will agree to? Because you could have two people in a room both say, you know what, this nonprofit has to be a creative one, and one's thinking Van Gogh and the other one's thinking Apple. You could use the same language but mean different things. Now multiply that by the size of your team. It's really hard. So being able to pull out sometimes this may be with outside help. Other times there are some helpful exercises that help you get through things like that. And then you want to start ideating divergence. Start thinking in terms of all different kinds of ways of thinking about your nonprofit. You know, you could do mental exercises or role playing, or you could do mashups. Like, what if your nonprofit was a hotel? How would it serve its donors? And you start like allowing different areas to spark. The reason I say this is because often innovation is sparked when two or more seemingly unrelated ideas intersect. It might be, how do we diverge even further? Well, you know, why don't we go to places that we're unfamiliar with and begin to observe how maybe other nonprofits in a totally different space think about their issues. Then you converge it through design thinking and choosing things that are through the filter of, is it viable, is it feasible, and is it desirable? Just because you like it doesn't mean the people you serve will like it. That's just the reality. And then you rapidly prototype. You don't have to be perfect, but you got to build something. And I'm talking like physical. If it's like a community center you want to build it out of cardboard. Do something that gives you a concrete sense of what you're envisioning, and then test it out and then iterate it forward. So the idea is to go from a challenge, really go out into the wild, and through a lens of filtering or criteria, you bring it down to maybe 2 or 3 ideas that are worth prototyping, and then you test it out and see if it actually has traction before investing a whole lot of money into an initiative. Is that helpful? Okay, great. And so the third part is integrating and leading forward. Leading innovation is not easy. And anybody experience resistance ever? Right? Never in nonprofit work. So we've been kind of studying like innovation, and we've pulled some learnings about, I think it's at the end of the day, everyone's human. So there's things we've learned from technology, from psychology, that have helped us understand how our clients lead seasons of innovation. One of the things that come from tech that's really helpful is the Gartner hype cycle. And the reality is, this is in the context of technology, but we feel like there's application to those working in any sector. That there's some type of technology trigger or something, I'd say a new idea that is introduced. Generally, it leads to a peak of inflated expectations. Anybody ever experienced that? You have this amazing vision, and you tell everybody, and you articulate it, the phrasing is correct. All the language is there. In fact, you have the design behind it. All the brand marketing is ready. And everyone is super excited about this new program or initiative you're going to launch as a nonprofit. What happens is, as you begin to think through it and as your team begins to accept it and starts to run with it, you're inevitably going to end up in a trough of disillusionment. Because you're like, man, this is hard. We didn't think about this, A, B, and C. Who's going to pay for this again? Right, we need more staff. The vision is too big. You're the executive director, but the rest of us think that's crazy because the budget's not going to fit your vision. How are we going to measure this? Where's our accountability? What does the board think? What do our donors think? Does it give a negative perception? Are we positioning our organization correctly? You all understand, right? Some of you understand this way too well. And you're in the trough of disillusionment, and it's at this point that you have to keep pushing forward. Keep cutting the fat, staying more focused, testing out ideas, keep going, because eventually you'll get to the slope of enlightenment and ultimately to a place of productivity if you can go through. But too many organizations quit when they're down there. But that's the natural cycle of any good idea. And often the idea you start with is not the idea you end up with anyway. Just accept that as a reality. Another way to look at this is kind of taking some learnings from how people deal with grief, because change often feels like grief for many people. If you've led change, for example, this is like, many of you have seen this cycle of change, is that often people are usually surprised or shocked at something that happens. It may be a tragedy, it may be a sudden loss of a loved one. And this happens with ideas too. You may introduce an idea to the horror of your team, those you're sharing with. Maybe even as a team you're excited, you present it to the board, and the board's like, what in the world are you guys thinking about doing? And what happens is, First, there's this sense of like denial, once again, disbelief. This can't be. This is going to be a new way. What do you mean we're going to get away from child sponsorship? What do you mean we're going to get away from one time, get away from our galas? What do you mean? Like, a lot of us have asked a lot of these questions, like disruptive idea questions during the past couple of years. And so when there's area of like, people are going to ask you, go, no, that's not going to work. They don't know why, but it's not going to work. At those moments, I would say your job as a leader in integrating innovation is create alignment. And that's where you remind people of why this new innovation is still aligned to your core purpose as an organization. It may look different, it may smell different, it may feel different, but it's still in alignment. And then what happens is frustration will build because people are going to recognize things are different now. This is not the nonprofit I gave to 10 years ago. And in those moments, you have to maximize your communication. In fact, over-communicate. This is seasonal. That doesn't mean, this is less about, hey, we need to send X amount of emails every week. When you're in the season where you sense that people need to kind of come alongside and align with where you want to take everybody, you have to maximize your communication. Then, just like the other chart, there's going to be an area of like low mood, the sense of being depressed about the changes, lack of energy. In that time when there's low energy, you have to start spark motivation. Maybe it's telling effective stories of like some of the early wins of this new innovation in your programming. How those benefiting the most from this are really seeing life change. And some of that takes months, if not years. I totally understand that. But there has to be some type of storytelling that takes place that motivates people. Maybe your team members, some of them have to learn new skills. How many of you enjoy changing your tech stacks, right? It's adoption. It's painful, but it's continually motivating, saying, look, we're going to impact more lives if we do this right, and sparking motivation. And then eventually, people will start experimenting, initial engagement in a new situation. During that time, you want to develop capability because it is often new skills. New ideas require sometimes new skills. So it's not often, once you get beyond people's willingness to follow, right? If you can get them to a place where they say, you know what, why not? Let's go for this. You have to give them the skill set to do it. Because sometimes people are willing but not able, correct? And some people are able and not willing as well. Right? And if you know people who are not able nor willing, don't work with them. Right? And then as you experiment, people start making decisions, learning how to work in this new situation, feeling more positive. And that's where you allow people to share knowledge about what they're learning through this process. And it becomes a morale builder as well that ultimately leads to integration. I just have a few minutes left, so let me leave you with a couple of just like personal things you can do to keep yourself now fresh in not only in your thinking, but just your heart and your soul. Because once again, I'm not here to just tell you here 500 things you ought to do. Some things about leading innovation is that one is it's a long-term commitment to healthy habits. I think one of the great blessings of the last couple of years is that I feel like a lot of us had some opportunity. It's very paradoxical still. I feel exhausted but rejuvenated. I feel like a walking paradox. Depends when you ask me that question. Sometimes it feels awesome, and I feel I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have before. Other times I'm just overwhelmed and feel like I need to find a fetal position somewhere in our house and just go to sleep. Right? It's this tension that we live in. But leading innovation is a long-term commitment to healthy habits. Here's some habits to consider. One is create space to think, reflect, and diverge. Whether you're into early morning meditation or taking frequent trips, maybe even if it's 5 minutes during a lunch break to a spot, leaving your house. I got to say this now. Sometimes leaving your house, if you're working remotely, to see nature, to go to the lake, the beach, the mountains. It's so good for your soul to see things that are bigger than yourself. You don't have to be productive in those times. I'm not talking about like you need to create a strategic plan while you're looking at the mountains. No, Just go look at the mountains and remember that we're all very small relative to the rest of the universe. And the problem that we think is so big relative to everything else that's happening in the world may not be that big. And it's a great reminder to feed your soul as much as you do the work. Welcome the unexpected, sort of like what I mentioned. Innovation is often the result of two or more seemingly unrelated things intersecting that spark something good. So how are you intentionally putting yourself in environments that are unexpected? I share this in a lot of my talks. One of the things I do every year is I try to go to conferences that are outside of my space. And the reason I do that is because I want to hear how doctors solve problems. I want to hear how engineers solve problems. And trust me, engineers think very differently than going to like an artist conference. But there's so many things that they bring to the table, and it has allowed us to kind of work across industries and really learn from the way that human beings think about problems and how they innovate. The other thing is play well. This is kind of a lost art in professional work. We don't play that well. Some companies play well, but a lot of companies don't. And there's something about, because you access different parts of the brain when you're in a playful mode. It sparks creativity, it sparks competition, it sparks adrenaline and energy. Some of you are very non-competitive. Others, like my two kids, for whatever reason, they're recreationally incredibly competitive. But something happens in the space of play, and there's been a lot of research in this area. So giving yourself permission to say, you know what, we not only need to check in how everyone's doing, but we should have some fun together as a team. And it's okay. You're even going to impact more people if you do this part well. And to give yourself permission to do that. And one last thing is experience the miracle of writing. I know some of you have written a lot of things here. Just writing things down, adding another sense to the engagement goes a long way. You know, some studies have shown that those people, if you've ever had a friend or you've done this yourself where you meet them every year, say it's kind of an acquaintance, and they meet you for coffee and they still have the same idea, right? They tell you, man, this idea is great, until one year they say, man, I can't believe so-and-so actually did something with that idea. Because if we just keep talking about the idea and don't document it, what happens is it tricks our brain into thinking we're actually doing something with the idea by talking about it. But ideas, as you know, are impotent without action. And if you write it down on paper or put it in your computer, the beauty of it is now you have a point of reference. So if you're inviting someone else to talk to you about your idea, you could send them your notes. So they have actually something concrete they can react to, and it's powerful. You have a meeting with somebody and you're trying to build a partnership, you follow up with an email and say, hey, thank you for your time, here's what I heard today. Would the next following action steps make sense to you? And I will follow up with you. It moves ideas forward, the miracle of writing things down. I'll leave you with a couple of quotes. One is that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Some of you have heard this. And then I was walking through one of our clients' offices, and this is what it read on the wall. Inspiration doesn't favor those who sit still. It dances with the daring. It's true. Chance favors the prepared mind. Are you prepared to receive new types of insights? If you're looking for a new car and a certain model you like, suddenly you see it all over the city, right? Because your mind is prepared to see that. What are you preparing to see? And this is something that we have up in our office, is that we have to think big. I think that's a good thing. But we have to start small. But I think the key is to keep moving. And I think that's where the power is that if we choose to implement something, that something is better than nothing. We always challenge our team, could you do one thing this week to make our business better? It might be the way you write emails. It may be the way you communicate with a colleague. It may be the way you treat our clients. Whatever the case may be, just do one thing. But if we all did one thing every week, after 52 weeks, that's a lot of innovation, isn't it? And it just takes those little small steps to really actualize a big dream. Thank you. Thank you.